Mr. Millwright.
Thank you, Mark. Today is July 5th, 2023. The time is 5:08 p.m. and I'm calling to order the Baldwin Park City Council special meeting. City Clerk, can I have a roll call?
Sorry, yes, thank you, Mayor. Mayor Estrada.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Garcia. Let the record reflect that Mayor Pro Tem Garcia is absent. Councilmember Avila.
Here.
Councilmember Ayala.
Here.
Councilmember Damian.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, City Clerk. At this moment, I will move to open public communications. City Clerk, is there anybody looking to speak?
No, Mayor, this time we have not received a request for comment.
Great. And seeing that nobody in the audience is looking to speak, I will go ahead and close the public communication and move on to our open session study session. And we have a presentation regarding Metrolink Railroad improvements presented by Luis Carrasquero, Deputy Chief Operations Officer at SCRRA Metrolink, and Sam Gutierrez, our Director of Public Works.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, we have a presentation prepared for you. We have Luis Carrasquero. I want to confirm that he is on the call.
I am on the call. Can you all hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hear you and we see you, Luis.
All right, excellent. Good afternoon, evening, everybody. So I'll be going through this presentation. A lot of it is focused on the new technology, which we're calling wireless crossing near site station stop, or WCNSS. But then there's at the end of the presentation, there's also some information regarding our efforts for zero emission transition, studies that we've done, modeling that we've done. Not that there's a clear answer yet on that, but at least some information on our current status. Next slide, please. So to start off, I wanted to provide a quick Metrolink system overview. So Metrolink is the nation's third largest commuter rail. We operate and are made up of 5 member agencies across the 5 different counties. We operate 8 different route lines and service 67 stations, over 545 service line route miles. On our territories, we not only have Metrolink trains operating on us, but we have freight trains. So that includes the BNSF, the Union Pacific, as well as Amtrak trains, as well as our trains operate on other railroads. So we operate on BNSF, Union Pacific, and North County down towards San Diego. We run about 182 trains weekdays and 180 in the weekend. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start narrowing down specific to Baldwin Park. So Baldwin Park is the only tracks in which Baldwin Park runs on the Metrolink system is on the San Gabriel Subdivision. And that is composed of the San Gabriel line and the Aero service, which we just opened last October. The San Gabriel Subdivision has about 65.5 route miles, 87.5 track miles. So that means that 66.5% of that entire subdivision is single track. We have 119 crossings. So I just wanted to take a moment regarding single track. What does that mean is ideally we would like to have multiple tracks. Most of our territories have 2, or the most amount of multiple tracks we have in our territory is 2 main tracks. That allows us to be able to run service bi-directional. We are also able to run trains in the event that there is an incident on one track, be able to have throughput, although a little reduced, but it does give us that flexibility. Now, there's a lot of constraints regarding being able to build additional tracks. You need to have the real estate, the funding, but as of right now, it's 66.5% single track on the San Gabriel Subdivision. And specific to Baldwin Park area, it is single track. The entire subdivision has 20 stations, 16 on the historical San Gabriel line and 4 for the new Aero service that we just opened. It is a mixed corridor, as I was mentioning. So in here, we do run Metrolink trains, the Aero trains, and freight trains. During the weekday, we run about 84 trains, and during the weekend, 48 trains. And as I just mentioned, the Aero line, which is the 10-mile extension between San Bernardino and Redlands, we just opened it in October of 2022, and we run diesel multiple trains as well as legacy trains as well. So kind of narrowing down a little bit further into Baldwin Park, it's about 2.5 miles of track in the city of Baldwin Park, all single track. We have one station, Baldwin Park. There's a total of 9 crossings. And I try to visually represent it here on the map just to as a layout. So on the top right of the picture, that's where we have the Baldwin Park station, and we have Ramona and Pacific Avenue. And just to give a little context, is given the short distance between these crossings, they are all connected, or in other words, they're DAXed. And what that means is when one crossing activates due to trains on the approach, then the downstream crossings activate as well. The reason for that is we have federally required warning times and preemption times that we have to meet. And it would not be possible for each one to be done independently. So we just leverage one, which is mainly Pacific and Ramona on either side of the station, to then tumble down of the downstream crossings. And I wanted to, if you can go back real quick, I just wanted to touch on, I know that on the week of June 21st, there were some reports of gates down over a long period of time. I just wanted to touch a little bit about that, is that we've had a couple intermittent failures specific to Pacific, where we've replaced the module on the 20-year-old equipment. We have since then replaced the entire grade crossing module, with the hopes that this will ultimately resolve the events or the reports of gates activate and they remain activated, and that's then tumbling down the downstream crossings. And so far that's been the case. I'll touch a little bit later on the capital rehab project that we have for Pacific that will include brand new equipment and everything, but I just wanted to touch a little bit about those reports and those events that occurred a couple of weeks ago. Next slide, please. So now I'll get into the portion of the presentation on this new technology. And in order for me to get into that, we are leveraging a system that Metrolink has installed, we have available on our trains, and that is the Positive Train Control System, or PTC. And in a nutshell, this graph displays what PTC is. So it's a safety overlay system that is installed on our trains, and it's in constant communication with various systems out there for its purpose. So it is constantly getting GPS signals, so the PTC train knows exactly where it's at as it's moving along the tracks. It is in constant communication with the signals and switches, so the PTC system knows what signal is ahead, if it's a proceed, or if it's a stop, or if it's a reduced speed. It knows it ahead of time, and it also knows the switch in alignment ahead of the train. And lastly, but importantly, is that it's also in communication with the dispatching center in Pomona, so that if there is a need to issue a temporary speed restriction or a track out of service or a work zone, that gets sent electronically to the train, and then the PTC system is able to protect and enforce for it. Next slide, please. So building upon that, so PTC is designed to perform the following core tasks per regulatory requirements. So prevent train-to-train collisions, overspeed derailments, incursions into established work zones without authority, and movement of trains through switches in the improper positions. But most importantly, it needs to provide warning to the train engineer for all of these targets, switches, signals, speed restrictions. And if the engineer does not take time in a timely manner, then the PTC system automatically applies the brakes and stops the train before it gets into that unsafe scenario. This was a direct response to the Chatsworth accident that occurred in 2008. The initial PTC design did not contain any requirements or abilities for trains to communicate with crossings, to inhibit gate activation or wirelessly activate crossings. But now that we've been able to implement PTC, we're now leveraging that basic base infrastructure to then achieve operational efficiencies such as wireless crossing, which is what I'll present on next. Next slide, please. So here are some screenshots of what the engineer will see. There's the specific screen specific to PTC, but these are the screens that are tied with wireless crossing. So through PTC, the train is able to determine its specific train schedule. So we are able to assign per train symbol, like any passenger would see on the time schedule. The train knows at which stations it's making a station stop and at which stations it's making a through move. Like a good example would be an express train. Express train doesn't stop at every single station. And since it's able to know which stations it's making a station stop, it will then also be able to inhibit or keep the gates up for those crossings that are downstream of the station. The train communicates with that crossing. And then once that wireless communication is established between the train and the crossing, then the crossing gates will remain up as the train is approaching and making the station stop. So we're leveraging that functionality of PTC of being able to warn the engineer once the gates are up, hey, you have a station that is required. And in the event that the engineer is distracted, incapacitated, or doesn't slow down fast enough, then the PTC system will apply the brakes and enforce the train to come to a stop since the gates, crossing gates are up. Next slide, please. So in the next few, I'll present the conventional activation of crossing. So in this one, the train is approaching the station. You'll see that the downstream crossing activates, and I'll touch a little bit on that. Once the train is stopped for a while, then the gates will recover, and then ultimately, when the train proceeds, then it activates again. So why does this happen? So the conventional crossing system that's been in America for decades and decades is that the crossing activates based on the approach, but the crossing does not know if the train is making a station stop or a through move. It needs to default to the most conservative and safest approach, which is making a through move. So once you add in warning times that the trains need to meet the gates coming down and the preemption, then that's when you get the unnecessary double activation of trains coming to a station stop, crossings activate. If the train dwells long enough, then they'll recover. And then once the train leaves again, they'll recover. So I know different communities call it like the ghost train symptom, but this is what's currently happening now. So if we go to the next slide, I'll present how it will be alleviated with wireless crossing. So you'll see that as the train approaches, the gates on East Street are going to remain up. Train completes the station stop. Once the train is ready to depart, then at that point, East Street gates will activate. So you get a 1-for-1 activation when the train is actually proceeding through the station. Next slide, please. So just to summarize the benefits of wireless crossing, it reduces the amount of gate downtime at designated crossings due to passenger station stops. It minimizes the impacts to vehicular and pedestrian traffic to reduce delays and confusion at these crossings near stations. It extends the life of the crossing equipment since we're basically now activating the gates twice less the amount that they're currently doing now. And it also allows the train to depart the station without the need to creep or to start and stop once they're departing the station to wait for the gates to fully come down and then proceed through the station. Next slide, please. So this has been a project long time coming. I'll get into how this started on the Aero project, but now that that's been successfully deployed, now we are looking to deploy this elsewhere across our system. So what do we need to do to get this at the various crossings that we have identified? So there's a variety of hardware that needs to be installed at the crossing, also needs to be modified to include the new technology. We need to do application logic predictor changes. We need to procure licenses per each crossing location. We need to change our internal systems, and ultimately and lastly, test with test trains to make sure that the crossings are indeed staying up as the trains are approaching the station. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the wireless crossing was technology was initially developed for the Aero extension of the San Gabriel subdivision between San Bernardino and Redlands. It's been in service since October 2022 at 7 crossings, and this table below shows the name of those crossings and their respective station names. We went through extensive testing, but also FRA approval for this new technology, since this was kind of first of its kind in the nation. Next slide, please. So with all that said, the benefits of the technology, Metrolink identified a number of crossings throughout our system that we needed to prioritize. Where will this technology be implemented? And we went through various iterations and different scales of it, and we prioritized a total of 67 crossings. Ramona and Pacific, out of 67, are top number 2 and number 3 crossings, and they are actually going to be implemented with wireless crossings via 2 different measures. One is Ramona. We have a FRA CRISI grant that we received, and the grant will fully cover the design, the material procurement, and the installation and cutover. So this schedule right here provides a look ahead of our estimated implementation of wireless crossing at Ramona. So we have completed the design. We're currently in the middle of material procurement. There are some key components that are only available by a small number and sometimes only a single vendor, and they have a long lead time given its high demand. So we are working through that, and that's the longest range that we're currently dealing with. Once we get to that, then we're estimating then to perform the installations, the pre-testing, and the field testing to be done by September of 2024. Next slide, please. Now, same approach we're doing with Pacific Avenue. The only thing that's different is that there is a construction, a project that is Sam will touch on in a little bit, that includes new crossing house, new crossing equipment. So we're leveraging a lot of those efforts and funds and designs to incorporate wireless crossing. And for any material that is needed on top of that, we will of course be using the grant money to procure that and install it. And our priority is to have that project complete in its entirety, and then we will then proceed with the wireless crossing implementation. We want to make sure that we're not impacting that project, but at the same time, we will be working closely with that project team so that if there's room for us to do that testing, do that deployment at the same as the project, we will most definitely look to accelerate that schedule. Next slide, please. Okay, so that concludes my presentation on wireless crossing, and I'll touch on a little bit on some of our zero emission efforts. Next slide, please. So we've been looking at various technologies, solutions that are currently available in the market. So we have battery electric locomotives, there's hydrogen fuel cell locomotives, but then there's also multiple units, like the diesel multiple units that we have in the Aero. That one is diesel, but there are options for those to be battery electric as well as hydrogen fuel cell. So there's been a lot of effort investigating, running models through various of these solutions, and we'll touch on these on the next slide, please. So as far as our current locomotive, we run a push-pull operation that are hauled by locomotives. Our car length varies based on the territory and the service level, but our typical Metrolink train set is between 4 to 6 car sets. So that's locomotive, and on top of that, the 4 to 6 cars. That's around 253 seating capacity. So we ran models to have a zero emission locomotive, but our models showed that we're not going to be able to support the service in regards to the infrastructure or the need for the energy with the 4 to 6 car set. So we narrowed down our model to only be 2 cars per set. And then if we go to if you click on the next one, yeah. And then we also ran the same model, but now using multiple units. And in that one, we were able to get a little bit more flexibility on the 4-car single level multiple units. So we got to remember, although it's 4 cars on the DMU, it is only single level. And then the bi-level 2 cars, so you do get a comparable seating capacity. You actually get more on the 2-level one, 253 versus 224. So there's a lot to, that we've been running simulations to see what works best for us. Next slide, please. And on top of that, we're also constrained by our territory. You know, we understand the need that we have. If we do procure this equipment, it needs to be able to work across our various systems. Our train consists are not captive to a specific line or piece of track. They kind of rotate throughout the day based on the service needs, so we can maximize the use of our equipment. So we did another model for the most extreme scenario, which will be going from LA to Lancaster. There are steep hills. I think the highest grade is up to 5% there. It's 76 miles, a lot of curves. So it is the worst case scenario, I guess you could say, for us to run our simulations. Click on the next point. So if we have a battery locomotive, 2 cars, we identified that we would, on a single charge, we would only be able to do 1 round trip. With a battery, 0 emission, 4-car, 1 trip. And then hydrogen, it gets us 1.5 round trips. I think there might be 1 more. Yeah. And then the multiple unit hydrogen, it gets us 1 round trip. So, I mean, these are some of the constraints that we currently have. You know, right now we're able to operate the train throughout the day without the need to refuel, but this just kind of shows us that the technology will require additional infrastructure, you know, charging along the way at end stations, in between trips, which, you know, adds on to the turn time. So there's a lot to be said rather than just getting the equipment. That is part of the analysis that we've been doing. Next slide, please. So in summary, some of the challenges: zero emission technology is still in its early stages of deployment in rail. Useful life of rolling stock is long, 25 to 30 plus years, leaves few opportunities for emission upgrades. You know, once we make that investment, we want to make sure that we make the right investment, not for the near future, but that's going to last us for the duration of the equipment life. CARB and used locomotive regulation will only allow purchase of zero emission equipment starting in 2030. So that is, you know, right around the corner. So we're kind of faced with need to only procure zero emission, yet the technology is still in its early stages of development. So we're kind of dealing with that. Zero emissions transition will be costly, and it's currently unfunded. Tier 4 diesel locomotives cost around $10 million today. A prototype battery of hydrogen may cost 3 to 5 times as much, and that doesn't even include the infrastructure updates that I was just covering. New and robust grant opportunities will be needed to support equipment turnover. Our team has been, you know, diligently looking for those and working to obtain those, but it's going to be crucial to that expansion of our fleet in the zero emission world. Some of the opportunities: Metrolink's collaboration with other passenger rail agencies to help advance this technology, so that CARB emission regulation, it applies to the entire state. So there's other commuter rails in the state that are going to be in the same boat, that we feel like we can kind of leverage lessons learned, contract setup, procurement of new equipment that will be pivotal to our transition. New projects are underway that will help advance zero emission rail. Metrolink has secured $10 million in state funds to support a zero emission pilot along the Antelope Valley line, which is some of the information that I was just presenting. As well as Metrolink will operate SVCTA's Stadler zero emission multiple unit, the ZEMU. So that will be a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle that will operate between San Bernardino and Redlands, in addition to the current ones that are operating that are diesel multiple units. All right, and I think at this point, I'll pass it on to Sam.
Thanks, Luis. I appreciate that. So I'd like to touch a little bit on quiet zones and provide an update on the city's efforts on our quiet zone project. So first, I'd like to kind of remind everyone what a quiet zone is. So a quiet zone is a designated area around a minimum half-mile long along railroad tracks where train operators are prohibited from sounding their horns unless there's an emergency, of course. So the purpose of the quiet zone is to reduce noise pollution and improve the quality of life for nearby residents. Instead of using the horns, quiet zones typically implement additional safety measures such as improved signage, quad gates, and other warning systems to ensure the motorists and pedestrians at rail safety of motorists and pedestrians at rail crossings. The safety measures need to be in place before the city can apply for a quiet zone designation. Next slide. So what does that mean for the city of Baldwin Park? As Louise mentioned earlier, there are 9 crossings, eight or nine crossings. Here I'm just showing a few of them. There's 2 that are not shown here, but we could start at Ramona Boulevard, Pacific Avenue, McDevitt Avenue, Merced Avenue, and Foster, which is a pedestrian crossing only, so there's no vehicular crossings there, Francisquito Avenue, and Hamburger Lane. In order to meet the half-mile criteria, the city will need to make safety improvements to at least 5 of these crossings. Next slide. So, no, go back. Yeah, so these are the 5 crossings that we are looking into. We chose these because these encompass the greater amount of residents as opposed to the first 2, Hamburger Lane and Francisquito, are largely in a commercial area. So we have a construction and maintenance agreement with Metrolink and design services agreement with Metrolink. So we've been working with them in partnership with design and now construction improvements. Next slide, please. So Ramona Boulevard was completed in 2017. When Metrolink came in to make those improvements, they brought in quiet zone ready safety improvements. And so that's been completed. And as Louise mentioned, this is the first crossing that is a candidate for the wireless technology. Pacific Avenue, however, has been quite challenging to design and implement. And so today I'm happy to report that the construction and maintenance agreement with Metrolink has already been secured, and we're getting ready to list this project for construction. We plan on doing that this fall and going into construction first thing January 2024 and completed within 8 months. So this has been a partnership with Metrolink, whom they helped us out with our design efforts and did the rail signal design, and they will be implementing the construction portion of that sign, of the train rail side, and the city will be doing Pacific and Bogart and the city side improvements. And so as far as McDevitt, Merced, and Foster, which are the 3 downstream crossings after Pacific, those are currently under design. We were able to partner with, again, SERA Metrolink with a DSA, a design services agreement for the design of those crossings. So those are currently under design. We are expected to be completed by the end of 2024 and then go into construction in 2025. So as it stands now, I think it's our estimate that by the end of 2025, we would be ready to apply for the quiet zone designation. And so just wanted to add one last point is that we're also looking into incorporating Francisquito Avenue. So we're going to be approaching Metrolink to see if that is something that we can do to have a design of the improvements at Francisquito to include in the quiet zone and then extend that into the commercial area if possible. So that's something that we're looking into. And that concludes my update. Thank you. I'm sorry, can you? Do you have the design that you have been working? Absolutely, yes. Yes, yes, I can email that to the city council.
Great. Is there any other questions from council?
Mayor, I want to thank, and I know you established a good relationship with Metrolink, but I want to thank Luis because when the issues of the crossing arms staying down kept happening. Initially Metrolink's response was to do, in effect, a bit of a patchwork, meaning patching one and then the others that are bundled together right now by logic, and having the same problem because they were replacing only one at a time, not quite knowing that, the problem was more wholesale. So 3 weeks ago, I want to say, and not because I got caught in the in the waiting, but I did. Metrolink approached it more from a wholesale point of view and changed the master control here right by the station, and that should take care of the problem. In fact, they believe that's the fix. So it's a permanent fix until the wireless technology then comes in, which is what you just went. And it's going to provide a further level of refinement so that the wait time at the crossings, even with the problem fixed, now the arms being down, it'll be far more precise. As you saw, when the train comes to a stop, the crossing downstream, down direction of where the train is moving, is not going to come down until the train is ready to depart. So that should allow that crossing to still allow for traffic to flow, preventing the longer wait times. So thank you, Luis.
Yes, and we definitely want to, show our gratitude to Metrolink. I know that we have a really good relationship, and their CEO, Darren Kettle, has been very supportive of all of our efforts here at the city, especially when it comes to asking for letters of support for grant applications and things like that. So we're very excited about the opportunities of working with Metrolink, and we're also grateful for that partnership. So if there's no more questions or concerns from council or staff, we will move on to closed session. So thank you, Luis, for being here, and thank you, staff, for that presentation. At this point, we will move on to our closed session.
Thank you.